Okay, so I've now got safety pin markers in the corner of each of the 4 squares. So each of the 4 corners of each of the 4 squares, and we are ready to join them all together. And the reason we've marked those corners is so we can line up the squares stitch by stitch, because how we're going to join it, we're going to be using our 4mm hook this time. How we're going to join it is by working double crochet through both through one stitch on one square and a corresponding stitch on another square. So let me show you what I mean. If I put the right sides of these squares together, what we will be doing in essence, not starting in the middle, but just as an example to show you, my hook will be going through all the way through that stitch on the square closest to me and through the corresponding stitch behind, and I will make my double crochet through both of those stitches and it will join the squares together. So that's how we're going to do it, and that's why we need these little markers, because they are going to help us to match up. They're going to help us to know where to start and where to finish, and as long as we start in the marked stitches and move along one at a time on both squares, everything will match up properly, because everything's got the same number of stitches on it. And we're going to work by making one join across this centre part first, so joining this to this and this to this, and then we'll turn it and do the same again, so everything is joined together. So let's make a start. Okay, so I'm using French blue because it matches the border to make my join, and what I'm going to do to start off is, just as I said before, I'm going to place the right sides together on these 2 squares. So they're right sides together. I'll just move those out of the way for now, and we're going to start by putting our hook through both of these marked stitches, these corner stitches. Okay, now once you've put your hook through the corner stitches on the outside edges, you can, if you want to, if it's easier for you, you can remove those particular markers because they're not needed anymore. I'll just leave them there for now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, as we've done before, to join in new yarn, I'm just pulling up a loop and securing it by pulling up another loop through there. So our yarn is now nicely joined, and we will kick off by doing the first double crochet through. So I'm going into the same place that I've just joined the yarn, so into the same stitch, not moving along just yet. And I think I'm going to take that. I'll have to take those little stitch markers out now because it's a bit crowded. Okay, but I know where I am because we've joined the yarn in there. So going straight back in where we've joined. So I'm going to put my hook through this side and my hook through the square behind and make my first double crochet. Now, as I mentioned, as long as we move along one stitch at a time, and do take your time, make sure you don't miss a stitch or put 2 stitches into one. It can be sort of quite easy to put 2 stitches into one. I very nearly missed a stitch there. As long as you move along one at a time, don't miss a stitch, don't put 2 into one, everything should match up nice and neatly. Okay, so if you just go ahead all the way along the first side with double crochet, and we'll see what it looks like when we get to the next corner. Okay, I'm coming up to the last few stitches now on this side, and it's all thankfully matched quite well. And what I will say to you is, on these inner edges, so the second sort of set of stitch markers you come to, if you can, keep those in, because you're going to need those when you do your next join. So if you can manage it, keep them in. Even if you have to take them out to make the stitch and put them back in again, that's absolutely fine, but it will help you in the next set. Okay, so that's the last one. We're not cutting the yarn or anything. I just want to show you what it looks like before we move on to the next pair. So when I open that out, you can see this really nice effect. It's just sort of basically made the blue border a little bit wider, and it looks really nice and really neat, and it's very secure as well. So we're going to do exactly the same with the next pair, just continuing on. Like I said, we're not cutting our yarn. So if I do the same again, fold right side to right side. Obviously I don't need to join the yarn because we already have it joined. So it's just a case of putting my hook through the first or the mark stitched on this front square and the mark stitched on the back square. And again, if you possibly can, keep those stitch markers in because you'll need them for the next part. All right. Hopefully I've done that without having the loop on the hook. So let's try that again. So through the 2 marked stitches, and we can carry on. There we go. Right, so give that a little pull so it's nice and close. Okay, nice. Oops. I'm really making a meal of this, aren't I? Give it a pull so it's nice and close and tight there, that little corner one, and off you go again. So once that first one's out of the way, it becomes a little bit easier. And again, same as before, just make sure that you're moving along one at a time and not missing a stitch and not adding 2 stitches into one. Okay, last one before the marked corners. And again, at this edge, you can take these out if you need to. We're done with these now, if that's easier. But I do think it's essential to have them in there to make sure you're lining everything up. Okay, so that middle section is now joined. And again, if we open that out, you can see it's a nice, neat, really pretty join. And we're going to do the same thing across the centre now. You're going to have to cut the yarn and rejoin. There's no way of moving that round. So I will do that fast enough and we'll go the other way. The main the only sort of tricky bit going the other way is just these centre stitches, making sure those line up. So we'll have a look at that. Otherwise it's exactly the same. Okay, so I've turned them around now and you can see we've got this part is joined, and we're going to do exactly the same again by folding it in half and running along there with our stitches. So I'll make the start as before and we'll just have a look at what happens when we get to the centre point. Okay, I'm on the last 2 stitches before the centre point, and I'll admit it doesn't look very elegant here because it's quite crowded. So what we need to do is make sure that we are matching the centre stitches of this square and this square, not these yet, this square and this square. So my advice is make sure those stitch markers are through to the back and literally give them a little pull so you can make sure they're on the correct squares. So I know I've got to match the one that's marked here and the one that's marked here. And the reason it's a little tricky is because they've already been worked once in our last join, if you remember. So it is going to be crowded in there. So again, might suggest that what you do is get your hook through the marked stitch, which is there. And I can now remove that mark because my hook is safely in there. Okay, and do the same with the one behind. So I know it's this one. I'm giving it a little tug to make sure it's attached to the right square. And put my hook through that one, and it is crowded. I picked everything up there. I think I'll split the yarn, so I'll do that again. Take your time on this. It really isn't a rush. And this is the most awkward bit of the whole, I would say, of the whole square, the whole motif. So take your time on it. Use those stitch markers. If you use coloured yarn or something, it's perhaps a little bit more flexible. But anything will do. As you can see, we've achieved it there. So the hook is through both of the stitches that were marked. They've both already been worked. So I'm going to pull through and join, and now that is absolutely joined there. And we've got to repeat that exercise straight away as we hop over to the next pair of squares. So we've got 2 stitch markers left in this middle here, so we've got less of a sort of confusion now because 2 are gone. So again, I'm just going to put my hook through this first one here. There seems to be a little more space in this one because that little stitch marker is smaller. And again in this one here. And there we go. That is joined. All right, so now it's joined, I'm going to remove those to make the working of that a little bit easier as I go across to the edges. So now all you've got to do is, as we've done all the way along, is match up those last few stitches, and when you get to that outside edge, you can remove those stitch markers on that outside edge because they won't be needed anymore. We will need the ones at the corners, but let me just finish up and we'll have a look together. Okay, so we're on our last 2 stitches, and really this is very good practice for putting the whole blanket together, because you will be, if you choose to join in this way, and this is I think the way we recommend, if you once you're ready to, you will join the larger motifs in this same way, so using double crochet through both layers. So it's nice to sort of master it now on what is a lot trickier than when you're working the bigger pieces. All right, so I've got my last marked stitches that I'm going through. I can then cut the yarn, fasten off and pull, remove those last 2 little safety pins, there's the word. Okay, so opening that out, everything is joined neatly and securely, and that centre is nice and you know, it's nice and neat and unfussy, even though it was a bit of a perhaps a little bit awkward to do at the time. It's worth taking your time, keeping those stitch markers in, because it does create a really nice centre here. All right, so we're very nearly finished. We've got a final round to do. It's mostly very straightforward, but I'm just going to go through one side with you just to point out a little half treble that sneaks into the round. So we'll do that now. Okay, so this is why we've kept the corner markers in place, because this is where we're going to start our final round. So I'm just going to remove that. I'm still with the 4mm hook, and I'm going to join the yarn as we've done all the way through by pulling up a loop. And if you put the tail of the yarn over the top of the working yarn and pull up another loop, that's secure now. It's not going to flop about at all. So that's just joined the yarn, and I'm now going to work 3 double crochet into that same stitch, and that's our proper starting point. So that's 1, 2 and 3, and we haven't increased our stitch count at all, so I'm going to go across and do a double crochet into the next 13 stitches, which will get me across to the next corner. Okay, so I'm now doing stitch number 13, and I'm going to stop there because this is where we're going to make a slight change. You can see at the point where the squares have been joined, we've got this sort of natural dip that comes down, like a little natural V there, and we're going to fill that in by putting a couple of slightly taller stitches in to bring the work back up to the straight level of the double crochet that we're working. So we're going to put a half treble into this stitch and a half treble into the corner stitch on the next square, and that should close that gap nicely. So the stitches that you're about to work in, so I'm about to put a half treble into the corner stitch, has been worked already because it's been used to join the 2 squares together. So there's one. We've then got this kind of centre seam. Just ignore that and come across to the next stitch, which has also been worked, and put our half treble in there. All right, so I'll stop. In fact, if I put a couple of double crochet in, so we're going to carry on and do 13 double crochet onto the second square. If I just put a few in here and then take my hook out, you'll be able to see that that edge has now been beautifully squared off. It's all nice and level, and it's just the addition of those 2 slightly longer stitches that has taken care of that little dip and made it all beautifully neat. So that's all you're going to do around all 4 sides, and once you've done that and fastened off, you are going to end up with your completed leaf trellis block which looks like that, and it's absolutely beautiful. So I hope you've enjoyed your first block of Spirita Flora and hope you're looking forward to moving on to the next ones.